Hello and welcome to this Africa media briefing for the World Health Organization Africa. My name is Adrian Monk here at the World Economic Forum in Geneva. I'm joined by my colleague, Peter Vanham, pour les auditeurs en français. And we're about to talk with Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, her colleagues, Dr. Yoti and Dr. Yao in Brazzaville, Congo, and also delighted to be joined from Johannesburg by Lola Castro from the World Food Programme. So delighted to have you all here and to take questions. We're going to start in Johannesburg, if we can, with Cara Anna from the Associated Press. So we're just going to get Cara on the line and have her put her question to our panel.
Hi, yes, can you hear me clearly?
We can.
Great, thank you. Actually, this is a question I also asked the Africa CDC this morning. Have you begun to see any clusters of flu-like or pneumonia-like illnesses in Africa? And if so, where? Thanks.
Dr. Moeti, maybe you could take that with your colleagues. Okay, we just need you to unmute your audio there. Thank you.
Okay, it's done. It's fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
Also, good morning, and good morning to all the colleagues, journalists, and I'm also very pleased that Lola could join us from the World Food Programme. We are not starting to see clusters of flu-like illness yet in our influenza surveillance, as far as I know, but this is something that we think we were expecting to see if indeed there was some correlation between that and the COVID-19. So we're not yet starting to see this. We have a surveillance system for influenza in now over 25 countries, I believe. So we should be able to pick up. We're expecting, of course, the flu season to kick in, especially in Southern African countries, and expecting them to start seeing more cases. But as far as I know from my colleagues, not yet.
Thank you. Turning to Joe Bavia, who's Africa business correspondent with Thomson Reuters. Joe, you have two questions, I think. Just checking that we can hear from you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Yeah. So I was just, my questions are related. The first question is, I mean, in Africa, we have seen relatively few governments introduce the kind of lockdown measures that we've seen in China, in Asia, and now in Europe that experts are saying have been effective in flattening the curve. I wanted to ask about what are the kinds of economic restrictions, perhaps, that are influencing those decisions? What makes that kind of less practical in the African context? And related to that question, the fact that African governments aren't introducing such strict measures, what kind of impact is that likely to have on efforts to combat the pandemic in Africa and, by extension, in the world?
Thanks, Joe. And that for Dr. Moeti, and perhaps bringing in your colleagues as well on those questions.
Yes, thanks for that very good question. Actually, we're seeing an increasing number of African governments impose these physical distancing measures right up to locking down countries. We have, for example, well, of course, we have South Africa, which is the country with the largest number of cases. Botswana has just announced something. In Nigeria, there's a lockdown of Abuja and Lagos. In the Congo, where we are sitting, since yesterday, there are restrictions of movements. There's a curfew that has been put in place. So this is expanding as far as countries are concerned. The economic impact is a great concern the potential economic impact is a great concern and requires that governments should then put in place mitigation measures in order, for example, for people at the lowest socioeconomic levels not to suffer unduly from the fact that, for example, many of them work in the informal sector of the economy and do not have formal employment. Some of the people are working as market stall holders and need to earn their living, earn some money every day in order to be able to put food on the table. So these are some of the concerns. Many countries have closed schools already, and my colleagues in UNICEF tell us that hundreds of millions of children are already not going to school in Africa. I think it's a very challenging need to balance the feasibility of some of these physical distancing measures in contexts where people, families live in very small spaces, they have very communal types of lives, and actually literally physical distancing within the house might be quite a challenge. These are some of the considerations that we've seen in some countries that have imposed these measures where people find it very difficult to stay indoors. It is hot, the space is very small, the numbers of people is large. And, but at the same time, then the countries are also having to try whatever they can to achieve the social distancing, especially in the early phases of the pandemic or of transmission in these countries, where before you start getting very wide generalized transmission. So we think this needs to be assessed in the context of each and every country. It is a good thing that countries are making the attempt to take advantage of these measures. But if actions are taken, these need to be very much be accompanied by mitigation measures of many types. First, to ensure that they are feasible. So for example, in places where people do not have running water in the house, where water is scarce, we need to have governments take that into account, ensure that they are providing water. Then this is a practical measure for people to implement, or providing the type of alcohol-based solutions that will make this feasible. So my conclusion is that physical distancing is a very important component of controlling this virus. We've seen it applied in contexts which are quite different from in Africa, and where it is being applied in Africa, there needs to be very careful, thoughtful analysis and urgent putting in place mitigation measures to make sure that these measures are feasible for the population and people who are vulnerable don't suffer unduly. And I'm sure that Lola could add something here about the risk to people being able to have their daily nutritional needs met under these lockdown contexts.
Lola.
Yeah, effectively. Thank you, Dr. Moeti. I think you explained a lot of the challenges we may have during lockdowns. But let me tell you how do we see the situation from the food security perspective. Of course, we have the urban populations and the rural populations, which in this moment, they need to be looked differently in relation to how we approach their food security. Normally in Southern Africa, in a normal year, we have between 20 to 45 million people who are already food insecure related to climatic shocks or other issues. But at this moment, what we are seeing is that the additional impact of COVID lockdown, or maybe even the situation that governments will need to reduce the movement of people and transport may affect us very, very much. And what we are trying, the message for us is like, look, make sure that your most vulnerable are supported, especially the undernourished children, the people with HIV/AIDS, the people who gain their bread every day. They need to be supported in one way or another. And the governments are putting measures in different countries for that. And we as United Nations, as Dr. Moeti said, we're also working with them. The other, I think, very important point here is the issue of maintaining the trade, the markets functioning and the trade, because in Southern Africa, we have 8 of the 12 countries where WFP has presence, where they are basically low income and food insecure countries. So we really need to keep the food moving moving across the region from the producing countries to the others to avoid more food insecurity. And the children at the school, now the children are not going at the school. Many children get their only meal a day in the schools, the school meals. And for example, World Food Program works with the governments with 2.8 million children across Southern Africa to receive school meals. Now we're trying to find solutions how to do that in a different way. Let me leave it here for potential more questions.
Thank you.
Merci, Madame Castro. Et on voudrait aussi poser cette même question en français, notamment la question sur les mesures de confinement qui sont mises en place maintenant des pays francophones aussi en Afrique et l'impact que cela a sur non seulement la santé publique, évidemment, mais aussi la situation socio-économique. Docteur Matshidiso Moeti, pouvez-vous aussi nous donner la résumé en français?
Oui, effectivement, nous voyons de plus en plus les gouvernements africains mettre sur place ces mesures de confinement, comme ça s'appelait. Commençons par les vols internationaux sont presque, comme on dit, interdits dans beaucoup de pays. Et en ce qui concerne le mouvement des personnes de façon normale, il y a de plus en plus dans des pays les mesures de distance physique qui sont en train d'être mises sur place, que les personnes ne peuvent pas sortir de leur maison, ou bien la sortie est limitée aux groupes essentiels, aux travailleurs essentiels, et la façon d'utiliser le transport aussi est limitée. C'est une possibilité de diminuer la transmission du virus, mais dans le contexte africain, il y a beaucoup de défis qui doivent être pris en compte au cours de la mise en place de ces mesures. Nous pensons surtout de la possibilité même de rester à la maison dans de petites maisons où nous n'avons pas assez de la place pour tout le nombre de familles que nous avons beaucoup dans nos contextes africains. Ça, c'est un grand défi physiquement difficile. Nous devons, ça doit être pris en compte si le gouvernement décide de mettre sur place ces mesures. Il y a aussi du fait que la plupart des travailleurs africains sont dans le secteur informel des économies. Donc, ils n'ont pas un emploi régulier. Ils doivent sortir, ils doivent travailler chaque jour pour gagner leur vie, pour être capables d'acheter la nourriture pour leur famille de façon quotidienne presque. Donc, s'ils ne peuvent pas sortir, c'est un grand défi pour eux. Donc, selon nous, le gouvernement doit analyser tous ces contextes, ces défis et mettre sur place des mesures qui peuvent faire face à ces impacts non planifiés des mesures de confinement. Et je pense surtout de l'accès à la nourriture pour la population, surtout le groupe le plus vulnérable. Et je crois que mon collègue, Madame Castro, peut s'adresser à cette volet.
D'accord. Madame Castro?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Excusez-moi, mon français peut-être c'est un peu rougi, mais quand même, je vais essayer mon mieux. Disons, la situation, comme on a dit, dans l'Afrique australe et l'Afrique en général, c'est que la situation de sécurité alimentaire, c'est en général un peu compliqué déjà au raison des changements climatiques, entre des autres choses. Par exemple, dans l'Afrique australe, on a vu dans les troisièmes années passées, on a vu des situations de sécheresse, des situations de cyclones qui ont déjà laissé beaucoup de gens en insécurité alimentaire. Et maintenant, avec toutes ces mesures qui sont en train de se prendre dans la région, on voit que aussi les régions, les villes, ils sont aussi affectés par des insécurités alimentaires, surtout comme Dr Moeti l'a très bien dit, les personnes qui sont les plus vulnérables, c'est lui qui travaille chaque jour pour gagner l'accès à la nourriture. Et c'est pour ça qu'on doit vraiment, quand on prend des mesures contre le Covid, faire attention aux groupes plus vulnérables et surtout des groupes qui sont déjà en vulnérabilité et insécurité alimentaire. Disons, on doit donner des subsides, penser aux enfants qui sont à l'école, qui ne reçoivent plus la nourriture de chaque jour qu'ils reçoivent à l'école. On doit penser aux groupes vulnérables mal nourris déjà, comment on va ajouter des solutions et aussi éviter qu'ils vont se détériorer parce que j'imagine que le virus, il va être avoir beaucoup plus de facilité de se répandre si on a des populations qui sont vulnérables, plus vulnérables. Disons, important aussi, l'importance, c'est incroyable l'importance de maintenir le système d'alimentation qui marche. Disons, la production, les transports de nourriture dans les régions et aussi les frontières ouvertes, les ports ouverts pour éviter qu'il y ait un manque de nourriture dans les marchés et qu'il y ait une inflation des prix aussi. Merci.
Merci. And we have some questions already in specifically to Madam Castro. So we'll come to you in a moment with some of those questions. I want to turn first, though, to the Mail and Guardian and to Simon Allison, who's on the line. Simon.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to ask, South Africa's rates of new infections appear to have slowed. Does this mean that the national lockdown is working, or is it too early to make those kinds of assessments?
Thank you. Dr. Murty, is that something you and your colleagues have been noting with enthusiasm, that this appears to be something that's working properly and is helping to alleviate the situation in South Africa, or is it too early to say?
Yes, I believe it's too early to say. The lockdown has been in place for a few days, and I think that infections that would start, transmission that would start to be slowed down by the lockdown would only show itself in the reduction of cases some days from now, not yet in my view. We do also know that there had been an accumulation, a kind of backlog of tests that needed confirming in the system in South Africa. So perhaps some of the dramatic recent increase might have been due to the confirmations coming in a group, so to speak, not spread out, since there were some delays initially in finalizing and carrying out the tests. South Africa had to carry the burden initially of confirming the tests of a number of surrounding countries that had to send specimens there. So we believe they face that challenge in terms of initial capacity. So I think we need to wait a while before we can come to such a conclusion.
Thank you. Turning to McDonald Zirutwe from Zimbabwe, from Reuters, who's on the line. McDonald, you have a question for the World Food Programme.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So my first question is to the World Food Programme. Most countries obviously have imposed, these lockdowns, and my question is: will this not affect the movement of food aid, especially in Southern Africa, to needy communities? And what is WFP doing to ensure that they overcome any logistical issues that may be arising due to the closures of borders? And the second one is for the WHO. Whether and how are they helping African nations to ramp up testing, for coronavirus, which is a big issue, obviously, for most countries, and may account for the low numbers of official infections. If you look at Zimbabwe, for example, they've only been able to test less than 300, which is a great concern to many people. Thank you.
Thanks, McDonald. Perhaps we can turn Lola first to you for that question regarding the World Food Programme.
Thank you for the question. I think it is extremely important that, as I said before, that the food systems continue functioning, and not only continue functioning in the countries, like, for example, I'm sitting in Johannesburg in South Africa, but also that they are able to continue moving across the borders. Let me tell you that the World Food Programme in the region supports around 18 to 20 million people with food assistance, be in kind or cash transfers, depending on the functioning of the markets. And at this moment, we continue working in Zimbabwe. We are in Zimbabwe at this moment working with the Project Lean Season that is supporting the people affected by the big droughts, the last three years droughts. 4.1 million people are being supported in Zimbabwe with World Food Program. And they are not only rural populations, there are also urban populations. In 8 urban centers, we're doing cash transfers as well. So basically, for us, it's very, very critical to maintain that. And the only way to maintain is getting permissions from governments. And in this case, let me explain you very rapidly what we have done. Over the last week, before South Africa closed, went to lockdown, we requested the South African government a sort of like humanitarian corridor, allow the vessels to land in Durban to be offloaded and be moved to the different countries, the commodities. Allow the suppliers in South Africa who are producing nutritious foods and maize meal for other countries in the region to continue providing so their workers can work and they can continue providing World Food Program the food to move across. And allow also the borders and this cargo to move across the borders. And I must report that at this moment, we have been almost 7 days in lockdown and we have seen no problems. Our food continues moving in South Africa and to the other countries in the region, to Namibia, Botswana, to Zimbabwe, to Zambia, to every country, and also from other countries like Mozambique continue moving into Zimbabwe, Malawi into Zimbabwe as well. Just to let you know that this is working well, but we really need to maintain it. And maybe at this moment, we are only maintaining our actual normal distributions, but maybe in the future, depending on the effect of the virus and the effect on the food systems, especially on the smallholder farmers that may have problems to access their fields, to have access to markets, to be able to sell their products, maybe we'll see an increase of prices and an increase of number of people who will require food assistance. At this moment, we're just asking to the donors to give us $413 million to be able to buy the food on time, now that harvest is coming, to be able to distribute in the next 3 months on time. We have also changed the modality of distributions. We have implemented physical distancing. We have implemented hand washing. We have protected our humanitarian and workers and civil society workers who are working with the communities to protect everybody and do no harm during the distributions. That's also very critical.
Thank you. Just a reminder before we go to Dr. Moeti for Donald's other question, please use the Q&A function on the chat and we can read your question out. And if you can just tell us your name and your organization, that would be fantastic. Dr. Moeti, just turning to you for the second part of McDonald's question there.
Okay, thank you. WHO has worked very hard with governments to expand their capacity for testing. Working with partners like the Africa CDC, we've carried out training. We have helped procure testing equipment and also testing supplies, including lab kits. So for example, at the beginning of February, we only had 2 laboratories in the WHO Africa region, meaning sub-Saharan Africa plus Algeria, which could confirm this virus. And now we have 43 countries that have this testing capacity. So it's been a very rapid expansion of this testing capacity. The availability of testing kits is a big challenge at the global level, and I'm sure you're following all the discussions about that on the international media. I do think, though, that in the early part of the outbreak, we had, and we continue to see, quite a large number of alerts and people who have symptoms suggesting they might have COVID-19 being tested. So my sense is that from the functioning of the surveillance system, the alert system, and the testing and discarding of some of the potential cases, that we are seeing clearly not 100% of all the people who are infected. But I do not think that there are large numbers of people who are infected asymptomatic and the systems are not able to detect them. We would, of course, like to encourage a more active approach to testing as well as undertaken, for example, in a country like South Korea, so that it's possible to know early, even including when people are asymptomatic, who might be infected. In some countries, some sero surveys are being carried out. so that the interventions of physical distancing, contact tracing, quarantining such people and limiting onward transmission from them can be put in place. And here there is a real challenge of the availability of test kits. We're working very hard with WHO headquarters, partners like UNICEF and others to source whatever is available, and also working, for example, from our headquarters with the Chinese government, asking them to support and to encourage their manufacturers to increase their production of these kits and make them available through WHO and other partners to African countries. So it's a recognized challenge. It's something on which we are working with our logistics teams and our partners every day, because it's a very important part of the intervention of identifying cases, tracing contacts, and limiting the spread of the virus.
Question from Neil Munshi, West Africa Bureau Chief of the FT, who's based in Lagos in Nigeria. And Neil asks, what can or will African governments do to make up for their lack of ventilators and ICU beds? And given that likely there's a lack of those facilities, does this mean that mortality rates will likely be higher? And finally, he asks, what explains the very low number of cases so far in Africa relative to other regions? Is it perhaps related to the age structure of Africa's population? Dr. Moeti, perhaps you and your colleagues could address those questions from Neil.
Okay, thanks. So I'll ask Dr. Zabulon Nyoti to start answering the question of treatment capacity in Africa and probable mortality rates. Zabulon.
Thank you. We have seen globally the need for expanding the treatment capacity in relation to severe cases, and also those cases who need to be treated from ICU. And what we notice is a small percentage of people, also from the data available, about 1 to 2% will need ventilators, and also about 15% may need ICU. The health systems in Africa, as you may all be aware, before the COVID was already a bit weak, with minimum supply of some of these facilities, ICU and ventilators. We are at the moment working with the countries to estimate these needs. We have done some modeling, and we are finalizing those scenarios. And we are also collecting information from each of the countries based on the scenarios to estimate the real needs of ventilators. But we do recognize that there are gaps in health systems, including really availability of the ICU beds and ventilators. Concerning the mortality, the limited data we have for Africa, we have looked at, and we do see that like the global picture, we have so far had, of course, 125 deaths reported out of around 4,000 cases reported from the 47 countries in the region. We have also noticed that the deaths do occur not only in elderly. We have actually seen some cases where people less than 40 have died as well. And also people with some other comorbidities, like we have seen globally, having higher mortality. But of course, we have to interpret this data with caution because we still have small numbers. Concerning the increases, whether we are really counting all cases, we have seen, of course, in the last few days, a drastic increase, big increase in number of cases confirmed in various countries. And over 10 days, we have seen this number actually sometimes triple. So we think that our capacity to detect the cases contributes to this, good surveillance contributes to this, but also we think that the real spread of this disease is being reflected by this increase in number of cases.
Merci beaucoup. Et on voudrait peut-être aussi demander à Dr Yao un peu la même question, mais aussi on a reçu des questions des journalistes francophones qui nous demandent en fait, on voit que le nombre de cas est encore relativement bas dans plusieurs pays africains. On a évidemment des mesures de confinement, mais au-delà de ça, est-ce qu'on peut trouver des autres mesures qui peuvent être mises en place et qui sont peut-être mieux adapté à la situation africaine. On a parlé de la jeunesse de la population africaine. Il y a un journaliste notamment qui demande, Dr Roger Mogo de Canal+, si on peut faire par exemple en isolation plutôt des personnes âgées, les gens qui ont plus de 70 ans par exemple, et ou bien il y a un autre journaliste qui demande les mesures d'hygiène. Est-ce que ce serait suffisant ou est-ce qu'on doit vraiment aller partout à des mesures de confinement, encore une fois, dans le contexte, et peut-être vous pouvez aussi nous donner un peu plus d'infos dans le contexte de nombre de cas qui est assez relativement bas encore dans plusieurs pays africains. Dr Yao.
Merci beaucoup. Le nombre de cas en Afrique, en fait, progresse rapidement. Si on regarde ce qui s'est passé en Chine ou en Europe, on a d'abord une progression relativement lente et puis on passe très rapidement à une augmentation exponentielle. On a vu que les 26 premiers jours, dès les premiers cas en Afrique, on était autour de 1000 cas et ce chiffre, en l'espace de 10 jours, a été multiplié pratiquement par 4. Et donc, on avance vers une augmentation exponentielle. C'est un peu la tendance habituelle de cette épidémie, notamment due au fait que les premiers cas ont été importés et maintenant, on observe une augmentation, une multiplication de cas au niveau des communautés et c'est ce qui est d'ailleurs préoccupant. Donc, ces chiffres pourraient augmenter très vite et cela nécessite qu'on mette en place des mesures. Quant aux mesures de confinement, ces mesures ne peuvent être efficaces que lorsqu'on se focalise sur l'objectif de ces confinements. L'objectif vise à aplatir, à ralentir un peu la croissance exponentielle pour augmenter la capacité de réponse, notamment un mécanisme de détection, même au sein des communautés, la confirmation et la capacité aussi d'isoler et de prendre en charge des cas. Donc, toute mesure de confinement doit avoir un corollaire de mesures de santé publique qui puissent permettre d'avancer dans le même sens. Par rapport à l'âge de la population, cela pourrait être un atout parce que les observations faites dans les situations actuelles montrent que les personnes âgées pourraient être beaucoup plus vulnérables en termes de gravité de cette maladie. Cependant, cela pourrait être nuancé en Afrique. Nous avons une forte prévalence aussi du VIH-Sida dans certains pays. Nous avons aussi le facteur de malnutrition qui prévaut aussi dans certains pays qui font face à l'insécurité alimentaire. Nous avons aussi la prévalence de la tuberculose. Et donc, c'est des facteurs qui, combinés, pourraient ne pas forcément donner l'avantage à la jeunesse de la population en Afrique, pour lesquels il faut surveiller étroitement.
Thank you for that. We can go to Uganda now and to Esther Nakatsi.
Okay, what are they saying?
And Esther, can we take your question, please? We're just going to unmute Esther so that we can hear her question.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thanks, Esther. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Esther Nakazi from Uganda. And my question is about research in Africa. What is the WHO take on research in Africa? What is being done for research participants? What are the recommendations that they are putting in place for research sites that had participants going on? And what are they doing about, are they giving countries advice that is for all countries, or are they giving recommendations for each country independently, or are they letting the countries take their decisions on their own in terms of research and research participants that were in clinical trials?
Thank you for that question. Turning to Dr. Moeti and her colleagues to perhaps give you an answer on that.
Yes, thank you. WHO is working with other major supporters of research and countries and research, if you like, experts and institutes in the countries to coordinate participation and countries joining some of the clinical trials that are ongoing. So there's a clinical trial, if you like, platform called Solidarity, which is testing some therapeutics, including hydroxychloroquine and others, and combinations both for treatment and for prophylaxis among healthcare workers, in which countries are being invited to join so that we can have a larger number of subjects which are being studied in order to provide the data that's required. So this, I'm aware, there's a big attempt to coordinate this, to put together all the capacities, a little bit having learned from the experience of the Ebola experimental drugs and the Ebola vaccine. So the research that is going on, there is a big attempt to coordinate it so that similar methodologies can be applied, and we can then benefit from having used the same way of doing the research to be able to analyze it and learn and use the data and interpret it and then take decisions in terms of policy for treatment, for example, all together. This is what I'm aware that WHO is doing with various partners. So it's very much a matter of putting information out there that this study is ongoing and asking governments, countries, and researchers to join this effort. I don't know if my colleagues have any further information to provide, but it's very much an attempt to coordinate this. Of course, if countries want to carry out the research, I suppose they're free to do so. We recommend very strongly using the same protocols and approaches. The situation is changing quickly. At the moment, the numbers of subjects are small, so that we can really facilitate common learning and common policy development out of these studies. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two questions coming up from Zimbabwe. One is directed at the WHO. The other from Ish Mafundikwa is directed at the World Food Programme. Go to the first question. We've got Privilege Musvanhiri from Deutsche Welle in Zimbabwe. And can we just cut up to Privilege, please, for her question? For his question. And we'll need to unmute the microphone in order to hear. Fingers crossed we can get that slight technical. Okay, so we're going to, if we can, move on to Ish Mafundikwa. And just see if we can get Ish on the line from Zimbabwe, who has a question for the World Food Programme. Just checking to see if that connection works. Thanks for bearing with us. It's, as you can imagine, connectivity is difficult for all our callers. So we appreciate your patience in staying with us. Okay, don't think we're going to get to either of them quite yet. Just reading Privilege's question here, Privilege is asking if there's concern that African governments are not being entirely truthful on the statistics relating to infections. What's the WHO's take on that? How confident are you in the statistics you're seeing coming out of governments? Dr. Moeti.
Thank you. On the whole, our country teams are working very closely with the ministries of health on surveillance. And of course, initially it might take some days for us to be well established for the information to be shared with WHO. We, all countries virtually in our region are signatories of the international health regulations. So we remind them periodically that this is both a protection for them because it requires all countries to share information with WHO to enable the international spread of disease to be prevented and limited, working jointly, it's also a responsibility for them to themselves share their own information as early as possible in as much detail as is possible, so that we can support the analysis of this data to enable countries to then shape their strategies of limiting the spread. So this is a very important tool and platform that we remind governments about, and ensure that they understand that it is a collective tool for collective benefit. Because if we know what's actually happening together, we can work together to intervene, and this is for the interest of the country affected, but also for the neighboring countries, so that some of the measures that are being undertaken now, border closures, etc., might be minimized if we are sharing information openly. If your neighbor knows what is your situation, and contiguous districts, for example, can work together in order to limit the spread of disease together. So the IHR, of course, we work, as I said, on a day-to-day basis with governments. We encourage them, but they have an obligation in line with the international health regulations to openly share information. And this is something about which we remind them as well.
Thank you. We have a question from Zimbabwe, again from Ish Mafundikwa, and this question is directed to Lola Castro. Ish, you can go ahead and ask your question. Just trying to see if we can get your connection a little bit better. Hoping that we can do that. No, we're struggling with both of those connections, I think. No, not going to quite make it. But Ish's question for you, Lola Castro, in Johannesburg, is Zimbabwe has a very high number of food insecure people that are being fed by the World Food Programme. Is there a plan to help daily wage earners who can't work because of the COVID-19 lockdown?
Good question. At this moment, as I said before, we plan to continue what we are doing at this moment, that is reaching 4.1 million people in Zimbabwe. That's all out of the 7.7 million who are food insecure this year, according to analysis. These 4.1 million are in both 8 urban areas, which are Harare, Masvingo, others, as well as the rural areas of the country. The issue of urban workers, we have not yet been requested to, but for World Food Programme, we will focus most not on the real socioeconomic status at this moment, but on the vulnerability or the inability of people to access food and the request from the different actors or the assessment. So at this moment, we are not, but obviously we are open, like I must say, for example, in the Republic of Congo, where Dr. Moeti and her team are sitting, after the lockdown, we received a request, and 20,000 vulnerable people in Brazzaville will start receiving some support from the World Food Programme. And this is a new program related to the COVID-19 lockdown that is leaving people more vulnerable and unable to access the food they need every day.
Thank you very much. And I think we can go to Ashish Kool. Ashish, do we have you on the line?
Hi, can you hear me?
Great. Can you just tell us where you're dialing in from and your news organization?
I'm dialing in from Mozambique, and my question is to all the panelists. Anybody who can answer this. Is this true that the trend of what we've been seeing, I saw a document from WHO saying that the malaria affected countries where the malaria is there, they are less prone to have the COVID virus?
Okay, thanks for that question. Dr. Moeti and colleagues, is there any evidence that you're seeing that malarial affected countries are less prone to COVID-19 infection?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid we do not have any such observation. Some of the countries where we are seeing cases expanding in Nigeria, in Senegal, are countries where we have malaria significantly, in Burkina Faso as well. So I'm afraid not.
Merci. Et on voudrait aussi poser une question de Falila Gbada Massi, qui travaille pour France Télévisions, évidemment en France, à Paris. Et il demande, y a-t-il des pistes pour soigner la maladie coronavirus ou la maladie liée au coronavirus du côté des tradipraticiens africains, à l'instar de ce qui est fait dans la médecine traditionnelle chinoise, parce qu'on entend qu'en Chine, on a on a essayé de faire la médecine traditionnelle chinoise pour résoudre les maladies liées au coronavirus. Est-ce qu'il y a est-ce que ce serait aussi possible pour les tradipraticiens africains ou non pas? Peut-être on demande Dr Yao d'intervenir.
Merci beaucoup. Ce sont des pistes qui sont explorées et en ce moment, nous travaillons à ce que, au niveau de la plupart des pays, qu'il y ait des équipes de recherche et donc des équipes de recherche qui peuvent en fait mettre l'accent sur toutes ces possibilités thérapeutiques, bien sûr en respectant un certain protocole avec l'approbation de différents comités d'éthique. La difficulté en Afrique autour de ces médicaments dits traditionnels, c'est la définition claire de la posologie, l'analyse des effets secondaires qui peuvent en découler, mais ce sont des pistes qui sont à explorer. Et d'ailleurs, dans la sensibilisation, parce que c'est le premier recours pour plusieurs Africains, dans la sensibilisation, ce sont des groupes que les équipes ciblent pour sensibiliser, pour mieux comprendre la maladie et aussi orienter les personnes qui sollicitent leurs services. Mais c'est des pistes à explorer avec des équipes de recherche africaines que nous essayons de motiver et de mettre en place.
Vous avez des conseils pour ceux qui cherchent de l'aide maintenant, parce que vous avez dit on explore.
Ah oui, pour ceux qui cherchent de l'aide maintenant, comme je dis, il n'y a pas d'évidence. C'est la difficulté avec la médecine traditionnelle. C'est pour cela que sensibiliser, c'est ceux qui donnent ces services pour que dans ce cas d'une maladie qui est méconnue, même s'il y a des symptômes qui ressemblent à la grippe, qu'ils puissent orienter des malades vers les structures de santé qui ont la capacité de détection et qui peuvent mettre en place, en fait, faire face à l'aggravation lorsque on a des cas qui évoluent vers l'aggravation. Donc, c'est encore tout nouveau, c'est pratiquement méconnu de la médecine traditionnelle. Ça nécessite d'être exploré avec des mécanismes de recherche et avec des groupes de recherche africains.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Yao.
Okay, we have a question from Juanita Williams at allafrica.com for Lola Castro at the WFP. And Juanita says, the WFP is clearly concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on food security. What can governments do to support small-scale farmers and small-scale food producers? Lola Castro.
A very important question, because as we know, most of the food produced in Africa is produced by smallholder farmers, and many of them are women. And their livelihoods, their daily life depends on what they produce, they bring to the markets, and what can they sell on a daily basis sometimes. So it's critical that we ensure that those producers can continue producing, and for that we need to make sure that the seeds are moving still and they can be planted, that the transport, small transport as well as the big haulers, transporters can move in the countries, and that some markets remain open, obviously respecting all the distancing and all the health recommendations from WHO. But it is extremely important for both, for the smallholder farmers to continue producing, as well as for the public who have access only to these small producers' commodities, to maintain the supply chains open. This, our recommendation will be really to the governments to look at this sector very carefully, to ensure that not only the big producers, but the small households who depend on the daily production and daily access to the markets remain open and continue able to feed Africa, and feed especially the area of Southern Africa, where we have many of these being women who are vulnerable women and will not be able living themselves to provide food security for their families if they are not able to produce and sell.
Thank you. Very direct question from Ruth McLean of the New York Times, based in Senegal, directed at Dr. Moeti and colleagues. Ruth McLean asks, how many ventilators are there in the whole of Africa? Is that a statistic that you have an estimation or an exact figure for, Dr. Moeti and colleagues?
I think at the moment we're trying to find out this information from our country-based colleagues in order to know for the region. So we don't have the actual number. I think what we can say without any doubt is that there is an enormous gap in the numbers of ventilators needed in African countries for this COVID outbreak. As we see the evolution of cases, as we see the number of countries where there is local transmission, geographic spread within the countries, and as this happens in the context of a global shortage and lockdowns that will make transportation of these ventilators a challenge. So I think what this tells us, we are working with our colleagues now to find out the actual information and to carry out projections of the probable number of cases that will occur in different circumstances in different countries, and therefore estimate what gap there will be. At the same time as we work with our partners on trying to find ways to source this type of equipment, and very importantly also plan for how to have transportation arranged for the procured ventilators when both the countries, ourselves and our partners find them, and to get them into countries getting the permission that's needed by the governments to enable these sorts of deliveries to happen. So it is certainly an area of great challenge in African countries coming, since in the majority of countries the numbers are still small, but we have seen how it has been one of the biggest challenges that more developed countries with more resources are facing.
And we have a question from Bronwyn Nielsen of Nielsen Network in South Africa, who asks, are we any closer to understanding the risks of reinfection? Dr. Moeti, again, perhaps one of your colleagues might like to weigh in on that.
Okay, Zabulon, perhaps you might like to respond to that.
Yeah, sure. The reinfection, we have no concrete evidence from the African region here. We have seen from literature, and also not fully verified what's happening in other countries, especially China, but we are keenly looking at what is happening in Africa. So for now, we don't have concrete evidence of reinfection.
Merci. Et on voulait aussi vous demander, encore une fois, on a entendu dans la réponse avant qu'il y a un manque mondial de ventilateurs et qu'il y a un écart dans le nombre qui est disponible en Afrique et du nombre dont on a besoin. Comment voyez-vous la possibilité d'en obtenir dans ce contexte d'un manque mondial de ventilateurs?
Ok, je vais demander à Dr. Yao de répondre à cette question. Michel, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. L'utilisation des ventilateurs est essentielle par rapport à l'expérience en Chine et en Europe pour limiter le nombre de décès, surtout des cas critiques et des cas sévères. Mais ce sont des équipements qui ne se fabriquent pas en Afrique, pour lesquels l'approvisionnement se fait sur le marché international, sur lequel les demandes sont énormes. Ce que nous sollicitons, et c'est ce qui se discute, je pense que cela s'est discuté au G20 aussi, c'est qu'il puisse avoir une sorte de solidarité. On sait que les besoins sont énormes. Il y a des pays qui, en ce moment, ont plus de 3000 patients en soins intensifs. Et donc, cela montre un peu l'ampleur de la demande. Cela pourrait être la même chose pour l'Afrique si la situation se dégrade. Donc, sans un mécanisme de solidarité, il serait difficile. L'OMS, bien sûr, travaille avec les industries manufacturières pour pouvoir stocker des stocks en main. Si ces stocks-là ne sont pas répartis avec une certaine solidarité vers l'Afrique, il serait difficile à l'Afrique, ne serait-ce qu'avoir le minimum pour limiter le nombre de décès qui pourraient être liés à des cas graves.
Thank you very much. Probably time for just a couple more questions. Do we have Elizabeth Marab from the Nation Media in Kenya on the line? If we do, if we can bring Elizabeth up. We're just checking that connection now, seeing if we can go to Elizabeth in Nairobi. Hi.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. Go
Great.
ahead.
So I have a couple of questions, but the first one is about the genetic
We haven't got
sequence.
long, so if they can be very concise, that would be great.
Great. Has any African country posted the genetic sequence of the COVID-19 circulating in Africa? I understand Nigeria had something, but I'd like a concrete answer on that. And then there is news that there are 8 strains of COVID circulating across the globe. Is this true? And the final question is on BCG. There are scientific papers that I've seen that suggest that because Africa has had a lot of immunization drives and a lot of Africans are vaccinated against tuberculosis using the BCG vaccine, it may be contributing to the lower numbers that we're seeing in Africa. Is this the case?
Okay, 3 good questions. Dr. Moeti and colleagues.
Thank you. I think I'll ask Dr. Yoti to respond to the genetic sequencing question, in fact, to the series of questions.
Yeah, thank you. We do know that our 2 laboratories in South Africa, the NICD and Institute Pasteur Dakar in Senegal, do have the capacity to do sequencing. And I'm sure additional labs, including those in Nigeria and so on, will be able to have that capacity. But for now, to answer your question, we do not have this data of Africa on genetic sequencing, but we are looking forward to really doing that important work you have highlighted. And then on the vaccination for TB, the BCG, there is currently no evidence that BCG works and protects against COVID-19. There's a lot of information in social media about many things, and my advice will be let's stick to the credible source of information, because some of this may actually divert the attention from concentrating on physical distancing, on hand washing, and on making sure that surveillance is done to pick cases early and identify contacts and trace and monitor them. So the credible source of information would be really advisable.
She asked a question about 8 strains of the COVID-19 in Africa. I think that we are not aware of this information, but we can go and search the literature and see where there might be some discussion of this. I'm personally not aware of any discussion of so many different strains of it.
Thank you both for that. We're down to our last couple of minutes on this briefing call. Very, very quickly, I just want to take one more question to both Dr. Moeti and Ms. Castro. It's a question from the East Africa correspondent of the German press agency based in Kenya, João Forster. And the question really is, what's the best chance that African countries have to get the spread of COVID-19 and the economic damage under control? Is it large-scale testing? Is it lockdowns like European and Asian countries? Or is there a different route that African countries should take? Really very sort of brief headline thought from both of you as we run down the clock. Dr. Moeti first, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of ways of approaching this. First, I think it's very rigorous, meticulous application of the public health measures that we have talked about. So the case identification, that means testing, contact tracing immediately, quarantining and isolation of these people and limiting the spread, because in quite a few cases, we still have only imported cases. And this is important for us to understand. And then secondly, I think it's very much intense community engagement and community information, and in a sense, making people feel empowered and confident in how they can take action to protect themselves, as opposed to being the subjects of impositions of rules by government. So people must know in detail what are the hygienic measures, the distancing measures that they are able to take, that they can take. And then thirdly, it's governments making and working with partners, providing what is needed for all of this to be realistic for people, to be feasible, including mitigating the impact of some of the limitations of movements that that imposed.
Thank you so much. That's great advice, and we've run out of time. Thanks to everyone for joining, and hope this was a useful and informative briefing. Thank you all.
À la semaine prochaine.
Thank you very much.